The silence before the truth. The evening sky over Los Angeles was painted in shades of gold and gray, as if it couldn't decide whether to stay bright or fade into night. Keanu Reeves sat alone on his balcony, a mug of tea resting beside his hand, untouched for nearly an hour. Below him, the city was alive with noise, car horns, laughter, the faint hum of music. But up here, silence had made a home around him. He looked at the sky the way a man looks at something he wants to understand but never can. His face was calm, yet inside him there was a quiet ache that words could never hold. The years had been kind to him in some ways and cruel in others. Fame had given him everything most people dream of, but taken the one thing he had quietly longed for, peace that comes from having someone to share life with. A few weeks earlier, during an interview meant to promote his new film, the host had asked a question that wasn't in the script. She had smiled warmly and said, "Keanu, you've done so much, you've inspired millions, but is there something missing in your life?" He had hesitated. For the first time in that entire conversation, his eyes had softened in a way that felt almost too human for television. He took a breath, then said in that calm, humble tone the world knew too well, "Maybe just someone to come home to. I think everyone deserves that." The words had spread across the internet like wildfire. Millions shared the clip, calling it the most honest moment they'd seen in years. People wrote comments like, "He deserves happiness," and "How can someone so kind still be alone?" But behind the headlines and the noise, there was one person who couldn't stop thinking about what he said. Sandra Bullock. She had been watching from her quiet home, a cup of coffee in her hands, her dog asleep at her feet. The moment Keanu spoke those words, she froze. It wasn't surprise that held her still, but something deeper, a quiet storm of memory and emotion. Years ago, on the set of Speed, they had shared a friendship that many called effortless. There had been laughter between takes, quiet conversations about life, and moments of silence that said more than words ever could. They were two people who understood each other without trying. Both had seen life's beauty and its pain. Both had learned how to hide sadness behind a gentle smile. After the movie ended, their lives had gone in different directions, as Hollywood often demanded. Yet somewhere deep down, Sandra had always carried an unspoken connection with him. And now, hearing him speak of wanting a wife, not fame, not wealth, not attention, she felt her chest tighten. That night, she replayed the clip again and again. Every time he said those words, she felt something stir inside her. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was empathy. And perhaps a touch of longing, too. The next morning, her phone buzzed with a text. It was from an old mutual friend, a producer who had worked with both of them years ago. It said, "You saw the interview, right? Maybe it's time you two talked again." He's been quieter than usual lately. Sandra stared at the message for a long time. Her first instinct was to ignore it. Too much time had passed, too many walls had been built. But something about that message refused to leave her mind. That evening, she walked through her garden, the sun setting behind the trees. She thought about how life had changed, the awards, the fame, the heartbreak, the silence after loss. She thought about the moments when she had felt truly seen and his face kept coming back. She finally picked up her phone and typed a short message. Her fingers trembled slightly before she hit send. "I saw the interview. You spoke from the heart. I hope you're doing okay." Minutes passed, then an hour, then 2. There was no reply. She set the phone down and tried to convince herself it didn't matter. But it did, because deep inside her heart, she knew there was something unfinished between them. Later that night, Keanu's phone lit up while he was still sitting on his balcony. He read her message in the soft glow of the screen. For a long moment, he didn't move. His chest tightened. Not with surprise, but with something that felt like coming home after too long. He smiled faintly and whispered to himself. She remembered. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before typing back. "Thank you, Sandra. I'm okay. Just thinking a lot lately." He stared at the screen again, as if his next words might change everything. Then he added, "It's been a while. Would you like to meet for coffee?" He hesitated for another second, then pressed send. When Sandra saw the message, her heart skipped a beat. She sat there in silence, staring at the words on her phone. She could almost hear his calm voice saying them. The world outside her window was quiet. The night air was cool. And for the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. The beginning of something real. She typed back softly, her lips trembling with a faint smile. Yes, I'd like that. And somewhere in the stillness of the night, two souls who had once walked side by side on a movie set, pretending to escape danger together, were now slowly walking toward something far more fragile and real. The next morning, the city woke up unaware that something quietly beautiful was about to unfold. But deep down, both Keanu and Sandra knew this meeting wouldn't just be about coffee. It would be about unfinished words, silent regrets, and the possibility of finding peace in each other's company again. And as the sun rose over Los Angeles, Keanu whispered a quiet promise to himself. If I see her again, I won't let silence win this time. The sound of the city returned. The tea had gone cold, and yet his heart, after so many years, began to feel warm again. The meeting that changed everything. The small cafe on Melrose Avenue was quiet that morning, tucked away from the usual Hollywood rush. A soft tune played from the old speakers inside, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee floated through the air. Sunlight spilled across the wooden floor, painting golden lines between the tables. Keanu arrived early. He always did. He sat at a corner table by the window, a place where he could see people come and go but still stay unseen. His black jacket rested neatly on the chair beside him. He looked calm, but inside him, a slow storm of thoughts kept circling. He hadn't seen Sandra in years, not since the charity event where they spoke for barely 5 minutes before being pulled in different directions by cameras and people. But today felt different. This wasn't about work or fame or polite conversation. This was about something deeper, something unfinished. He checked his phone. No message yet? He took a slow breath and looked outside, watching strangers walk by. Each face carried a story, each step a purpose. For a moment, he wondered if they looked at him and saw more than the actor, if they saw the man who still carried invisible scars. When the door opened, the small bell above it chimed softly. Keanu looked up, and there she was. Sandra Bullock stepped inside with that same grace he remembered, wearing a simple white shirt and jeans, her hair tied loosely as if she hadn't tried too hard. Her eyes searched the cafe for him, and when their gaze met, the years between them seemed to dissolve. She smiled, that gentle, half-nervous smile that once made long shooting days feel lighter. Keanu stood up, and for a second, both just looked at each other, unsure whether to laugh, hug, or stay quiet. You look the same, she said softly, walking toward him. He smiled, that quiet kind of smile that didn't need words. You don't, he replied. You look happier. They sat down, and for a moment silence filled the space between them. Not awkward, but careful. The waiter came by, and they both ordered coffee, though neither cared much for the taste. I didn't think you'd text back, Keanu finally said, his eyes watching the light play across the window. I almost didn't, she admitted. But then I thought, why not? It's been long enough. He nodded, stirring his coffee even though he hadn't added sugar. Yeah, too long. Their conversation started safe. About work, about old memories, about how strange the world had become. They laughed softly when they talked about speed, about the bus that refused to stop, about the jokes the crew used to make. But beneath their laughter, something else moved quietly, the feeling of what could have been. After a while, Sandra looked at him more closely. There was something in his eyes, a kind of distance she recognized. You meant what you said in that interview, didn't you? She asked gently. Keanu hesitated. Yeah, he said finally, I did. I think I've reached a point where noise doesn't matter anymore. People, fame, awards, they all fade. What stays is the thought of who you want beside you when everything else goes quiet. She looked down, her fingers tracing the edge of her cup. That's a rare kind of honesty, she whispered. Most people spend their whole lives pretending they don't need anyone. He smiled faintly. Maybe I tried that for too long. The cafe grew quieter as morning drifted into noon. Light shifted, and so did the air between them. Sandra looked at him and felt something stir. Not just affection, but recognition. She saw the same man she had once known, the same kindness, the same calm strength, but now there was something new, a sadness that hadn't been there before. "Do you ever feel like life gave you everything except the one thing that mattered?" she asked softly. Keanu's gaze lifted to hers. "Every day," he said. For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, a breeze rustled the leaves on the trees, and the faint sound of laughter came from the street. Inside, there was only the heartbeat of a truth neither could ignore. Then Sandra said quietly, "You know, I used to wonder why people thought we had something more back then. Maybe they saw something we were too careful to admit." He smiled gently. "Maybe. Or maybe they just hoped for it because they wanted to believe in something real." She laughed softly. "And were they wrong?" His eyes softened. "I don't think so." The words hung in the air like a fragile thread between them. She took a slow breath and leaned back. "You still speak like a poet," she said, trying to lighten the mood, but her voice trembled just slightly. "Only when I mean it," he said quietly. For the first time, she didn't look away. Her eyes met his, steady and unguarded. There was warmth there, but also a kind of unspoken ache, the kind that comes when two people realize how much time they've lost by staying silent. Then her phone buzzed. It was a call from her manager, urgent, about a meeting. She ignored it. But Keanu noticed. "You should take it," he said softly. She shook her head. "No, this matters more." For a moment, he just looked at her. "Does it?" he asked gently. "Or are we just remembering what it felt like to care?" His question cut through her like light through glass. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked outside, where a couple walked hand in hand across the street, laughing about something small. "Maybe it doesn't matter what we call it," she said finally. "Maybe what matters is that we still care." He nodded slowly. "Maybe that's enough." But deep down, both knew it wasn't. Their conversation drifted into softer places, about family, loss, and how hard it was to stay genuine in a world that rewarded masks. They talked about peace, about slowing down, about learning how to be alone without feeling lonely, and in that quiet corner cafe, two people who had lived under bright lights for too long found a rare moment of honesty in the shadows. When they finally stood to leave, Keanu said, "Thank you for coming." Sandra smiled, her eyes softer than before. "Thank you for asking." They stepped outside together. The sun had started to fade, and the streetlights flickered to life. As they reached her car, she turned to him. "You know," she said, "people still talk about us. Every time your name comes up, someone says, they should have been together." Keanu smiled faintly. "And what do you say?" She hesitated, then looked into his eyes. "I say maybe the story isn't over yet." He didn't reply. But his silence said everything. She got into her car, waved softly, and drove away. Keanu stood there watching. Until her car disappeared around the corner, he felt the old ache again. The one that comes when something feels close. Enough to touch, but still just out of reach. As he walked back toward his bike, his phone buzzed. A message from Sandra. "I'm glad we talked. It felt real." He smiled quietly, typed back, "Yeah, it did." He hesitated, then added, "Maybe dinner next time?" Her reply came moments later. "Maybe." He stared at the word, feeling both hope and uncertainty twist together, and as the night wind brushed against his face, he whispered, "Maybe is a good start." But somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew the next time they met, something deeper would surface. Truths they had buried long ago were waiting to be spoken, and when they finally were, nothing between them would ever be the same again. The dinner of unspoken truths. A week passed before they saw each other again. During those 7 days, both Keanu and Sandra carried an invisible weight, the kind that presses on your heart when something inside you is waking up after years of silence. Keanu had spent his days filming, smiling for cameras, signing autographs, pretending to be the calm man everyone believed he was. But every night, when the lights dimmed and the world went quiet, he found himself thinking about her. The warmth in her voice, the way she looked at him as if time had never passed, the way her eyes softened whenever she said his name. Sandra, on the other hand, had tried to keep herself busy with meetings and calls. But even during interviews, when someone mentioned his name, her thoughts drifted. She would smile, but her heart would twist softly, remembering the way he had looked at her, with that quiet, steady gentleness that no one else ever carried. On the 7th night, she finally texted him, "There's a small place near the hills. Quiet, beautiful view. Dinner tomorrow?" His reply came within minutes. "I'll be there." The next evening, the restaurant glowed softly under strings of golden lights. It was perched on a hill overlooking the city, not a fancy place, but one that felt real. Inside, soft music played and only a few tables were occupied. The kind of place where people came not to be seen, but to feel. Keanu arrived first again. He sat by the window, looking out at the flickering city lights below. He wasn't nervous, but something inside him was trembling. Not from fear, but from the awareness that tonight might change everything. Then she walked in. Sandra wore a simple black dress that caught the light every time she moved. Her hair was loose, her smile soft, her eyes carrying that quiet mix of strength and uncertainty. When she saw him, she paused for just a heartbeat, long enough for him to notice, then walked toward him. "You found the place," she said with a faint laugh. "You have good taste," he replied, standing as she approached. They sat, and for a while, their conversation danced around small things. Movies, mutual friends, memories from long ago. The waiter brought food they barely touched. The air was filled with unspoken words, and both could feel it building, that pull between comfort and confession. After a while, Sandra leaned back slightly and looked at him. "You always had this calm around you," she said. "But tonight you seem different, like there's something you're holding back." Keanu looked down, his fingers tracing the edge of his glass. "Maybe I am," he admitted. "You can tell me," she said quietly. He looked up, and for a long moment their eyes held. "Do you ever think about the past?" he asked. "All the time," she whispered. "Especially the things I never said." He smiled softly, almost sadly. "Then maybe we both have that problem." The silence between them deepened, not heavy but intimate. The kind that only exists between two people who understand what's at stake. Finally, he said, "After Speed, people used to ask if we ever dated. I always said no, but inside, I wanted to say we should have." Her lips parted slightly. She hadn't expected him to say it. "I felt it too," she said after a moment. "But I thought you didn't." "I did," he said simply. "I just didn't think I deserved it." His words hung in the air, fragile and honest. She looked at him carefully, her voice soft. "Why would you think that?" "Because back then," he said, "I was too busy running from the ghosts in my head. I thought love was something I'd break if I ever touched it." Sandra's eyes softened, sadness flickering through them. "You haven't changed," she said. "You still carry pain like it's your shadow." He smiled faintly. "Maybe. But shadows only exist when there's light." For a while, neither spoke. The world outside the window blurred into streaks of color. The hum of conversation faded until it felt like there were only two hearts in the room. Then Sandra whispered, "I lost someone too, Keanu. You know that. After that, I stopped letting people close. I told myself it was safer that way. But now," she paused, her voice trembling, "now I wonder if being safe also means being empty." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, he saw not the actress, not the friend, but the woman who had carried strength and sadness in equal measure. "You're not empty," he said softly. "You're just protecting something precious." Her eyes glistened slightly. "And what if I'm tired of protecting it?" He leaned forward slightly, his voice gentle but steady. "Then maybe it's time to let someone in again." The moment stretched between them, quiet, raw, and electric. It wasn't about romance or nostalgia. It was about two people standing at the edge of something real, afraid to move forward, but even more afraid to turn away. Then Sandra smiled faintly, trying to ease the weight in the air. "You always know what to say, don't you?" He shook his head. "No. I just say what I wish someone had told me once." The waiter returned, but neither noticed. Their food had gone cold, untouched. The only thing that mattered was the quiet truth hanging between them. After dinner, they stepped outside. The night was cool, and the city stretched out below them like a sea of stars. They walked slowly toward the edge of the hill, neither in a rush to leave. "You know," she said softly, "you're not what people think you are." "And what do they think?" "They think you're made of peace," she said, smiling faintly. "But I think you're made of quiet wars." He smiled. Not in denial, but in recognition. "Maybe that's why I've always liked silence," he said. "It's where the wars stop." They stood there for a long time, just watching the lights. Then Sandra turned to him, her eyes reflecting the city glow. "You said in that interview you wanted someone to come home to. Do you still feel that way?" His breath caught slightly. "Every day." She nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then maybe it's time to stop waiting." He looked at her, unsure if she meant what he thought she did. But before he could ask, she smiled gently and said, "Good night, Keanu." She walked toward her car, her steps slow, deliberate, almost hesitant, like she was leaving a piece of herself behind. He stood there watching her go, the echo of her words looping in his mind. Then maybe it's time to stop waiting. When her car disappeared into the distance, he whispered to himself, "Maybe she's right." But just as he turned to leave, his phone buzzed. It was a message from a reporter he trusted, one who never called unless it was serious. "Keanu, you might want to see this. Someone leaked something personal from that interview, the part they cut out." His heart skipped. He opened the link. It was a video clip, one that had never aired. In it, he had said something he had forgotten, something raw and unguarded. "There was someone once. I think she's the one I still think about when the world goes quiet." The comments were exploding online, and almost every viewer had guessed her name. The secret he had kept for years was now out for the world to see, and the woman he had just begun to open his heart to was about to see it too. The storm that no one expected by morning, the entire world knew. The clip had spread across social media faster than anyone could stop it. Headlines filled every screen. Keanu Reeves finally admits he once loved Sandra Bullock. Clips from old interviews, movie moments, and red carpet photos flooded the internet. Millions of fans started writing comments, turning a private truth into public spectacle. Keanu sat on the floor of his apartment, his phone buzzing non-stop. Calls from his manager, messages from journalists, even fan letters from strangers who called his words beautiful. But to him, it didn't feel beautiful. It felt exposed. He had spoken those words in a quiet moment during that interview, when the cameras had stopped rolling, when he thought it was off the record. He hadn't meant for anyone to hear it, especially not her. He turned off his phone, the silence heavy. He wanted to escape, to disappear into the quiet places he often went when life became too loud. But he couldn't run this time. Not when the one person who mattered most was at the center of it too. Meanwhile, Sandra's phone was already ringing before she even woke up. Her publicist, her friends, her assistant, everyone wanted a comment. "Is it true?" They kept asking. "Did he mean you?" "Should we deny it?" She didn't answer any of them. She sat by the window, still in her robe, watching the soft morning light spill through the glass. Her coffee had gone cold. Her heart was caught between shock and something deeper, something she couldn't name yet. She opened her phone and watched the clip. When she heard his voice say those words, "There was someone once. I think she's the one I still think about when the world goes quiet." Her throat tightened. She closed her eyes, the sound of his voice echoing in her mind. He hadn't said her name, but he didn't need to. She knew. The world knew. And yet it wasn't anger she felt. It was fear. Because now the world had turned something fragile into something loud. That afternoon, she texted him, "Are you okay?" He didn't reply for an hour. Then finally, "I didn't know they had that clip. I didn't want it to be like this." I know, she replied. But it's everywhere now, he typed back slowly. I can't stop people from talking. But I can be honest with you. Everything I said was true. She stared at the message for a long time. Part of her wanted to cry and another part wanted to smile. Honesty had always been rare in their world, and he had just given it to her, even at the cost of his peace. Can we talk? She typed finally. He replied almost immediately. Tonight. The night fell softly over Los Angeles. The streets shimmered under the glow of streetlights as Keanu drove toward her house, the one tucked quietly behind the trees, away from the noise. The city felt louder than ever, cameras waiting near corners. But he didn't care. When he arrived, she was waiting on the porch, her arms crossed, not out of anger, but out of confusion. She looked at him like someone torn between wanting to understand and wanting to hide. You shouldn't have come, she said softly. You asked me to, he replied. She sighed, then gestured for him to come inside. The living room was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. She had turned off the lights, letting only the dim glow from the fireplace fill the space. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she said, Do you realize what's happening out there? The internet has turned us into a story again. People are guessing, speculating, making jokes. I know, he said. I tried to stop it, but it was too late. Why did you say it, Keanu? She asked gently. He hesitated. Because it was true. Because after all these years, you're still the only person I think of when I imagine peace. Her eyes softened, but her voice remained steady. You could have told me that privately, he nodded. I wanted to. I just didn't know if it was fair to you. She looked at him for a long moment. Fair? Yeah, he said. We've both built our lives. We've both been through pain. I didn't want to drag you into my silence again. Her lips trembled slightly. And yet here we are. He smiled faintly. Yeah, here we are. She turned away for a moment, pacing slowly near the fireplace. I don't know what to say to you, she whispered. Part of me wants to be angry. Part of me wants to tell you that you made everything complicated. But another part of me, she stopped, her voice catching. Another part of me just feels seen. Keanu took a step closer, his voice low and careful. Maybe it's okay to feel both, she looked up at him. You've always been like this, calm in chaos. But this isn't a movie. The cameras won't stop rolling this time. Then let them roll, he said quietly. I'm not hiding anymore. Her breath hitched. And what if I can't do this? He paused, his eyes searching hers. Then I'll still understand. I've spent my life letting people go with love. I can do it again if I have to. Her eyes glistened. You shouldn't say things like that, she whispered. Why not? Because they make me want to believe you. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Heavy, tender, electric. The world outside faded. All that existed was the sound of two hearts remembering how to trust. She finally sat down on the couch, her shoulders trembling slightly. I don't know what happens next, she said. The media won't stop. Our lives aren't private anymore. And yet, she paused. I don't want to lose what we just found. Keanu sat beside her, leaving a small space between them. Respectful, careful. Then we take it one day at a time, he said softly. No promises, no pressure, just honesty. She looked at him, her eyes filled with something fragile and real. And if honesty hurts? Then at least it's real, he said. She smiled faintly, a tear slipping down her cheek. You always know the right words, don't you? He shook his head slowly. No, I just stopped pretending I don't feel them. For the first time in years, she leaned her head gently against his shoulder. He didn't move, didn't speak. He simply let her be. Two souls sitting in quiet understanding, the noise of the world kept outside the walls. The fire flickered softly, casting golden light across their faces. For a brief moment, everything felt still. Then suddenly, a loud knock echoed from the door. Both turned, startled. Sandra frowned slightly. It's late. Keanu stood up, walked toward the door cautiously, and opened it. A young man stood there, a reporter, holding his phone. Mr. Reeves, he said quickly, breathless, I'm sorry, but I thought you should know. Someone just released another clip. This time it's from the same interview. You mentioned a letter. Keanu froze. What letter? The reporter hesitated. The one you said you never sent. Keanu's face turned pale. He shut the door slowly, his hands trembling. Sandra stood up, her voice soft but tense. What letter, Keanu? He looked at her, his eyes filled with the weight of years of silence. The one I wrote for you, he said quietly, but never had the courage to give. The fire crackled behind them, her breath caught. Outside, the world was spinning with noise. Inside, two hearts stood on the edge of truth. The letter that time forgot the night hung heavy in Sandra's living room. The air felt different now, like truth had finally entered and refused to leave. The crackle of the fire filled the silence, its light flickering softly on their faces. Sandra stood there, still, waiting for him to speak. Her heart beat faster, but her expression remained calm. You wrote me a letter? She asked quietly. Keanu nodded slowly. A long time ago. She took a slow step closer. Why didn't I ever see it? He looked down at his hands, his voice barely above a whisper. Because I was a coward. Because I thought you were too happy to be reminded of me. She shook her head slightly. You think so little of yourself sometimes. He smiled faintly, sadness flickering behind his calmness. Maybe that's how I survive. He walked over to his jacket, reached into the inner pocket, and pulled out something old and folded, edges worn, paper yellowed with time. I kept it all these years, he said softly. I never thought I'd show it to you. But since the world already took everything private from us, maybe it's time you know what it said. Sandra hesitated. She looked at the letter like it was something alive, fragile, sacred, and dangerous. You still have it? I couldn't throw it away, he said. Every time I tried, something in me said not yet. He held it out to her, and for a long moment she didn't move. Then she reached for it slowly, her fingers brushing his. A brief touch, enough to make her heart stutter. She unfolded the paper carefully. The handwriting was simple, neat, but the ink had faded slightly. She took a deep breath and began to read. Dear Sandra, I never told you what filming with you really meant to me. I told everyone it was just a movie, that it was just acting. But the truth is, it never felt like acting. It felt like breathing for the first time in a long time. Every time you laughed, it made the long days feel lighter. Every time you looked at me between takes, I felt something I didn't have words for, something peaceful, something honest. I wanted to tell you back then, but I was afraid. I thought I'd ruin the friendship we built. I thought you'd see me as just another man trying to cross the line, so I stayed quiet, and that silence turned into years. If you're reading this, it means I finally found the courage to be honest. Not because I expect anything, but because truth shouldn't die in someone's chest. I've lost enough to know that love doesn't always need to be returned. Sometimes it just needs to be real. Thank you for being kind when the world wasn't. Thank you for being gentle when fame made everyone else loud. Thank you for reminding me that goodness still exists in people. I wish you happiness, even if it's never with me. Keanu. The time she finished reading, her hands were trembling. Her eyes glistened, but she blinked quickly, trying to hold it back. She folded the paper slowly, as if trying to protect it from breaking. You wrote this, after Speed? She asked, her voice soft, trembling at the edges. The week after, he said quietly. I never mailed it. I kept it in my drawer for years. Then when things got hard, I'd take it out just to remind myself what something real once felt like. She pressed the letter against her chest, eyes closed. Keanu, this is too late, he said, finishing her thought softly. She opened her eyes. No, it's not too late. It's honest. He looked at her, unsure whether to believe her or not. Honest doesn't always mean right. Maybe not, she said. But it's what we've both been avoiding for years. He sat down, his shoulders tense. I didn't want to make your life harder. I've seen what the world does to women in this business when people start talking. I didn't want you to become a headline. She walked closer, her voice calm but firm. You didn't make my life harder, Keanu. You reminded me it still has room for feeling. He looked up at her, and for a moment, something shifted. The years between them seemed to fall away. No walls, no distance, no fame. Just two people who had once shared silence, now sharing truth. "Do you know what the cruelest part is?" she said softly. "You wrote this letter years ago, but somehow I think I was waiting for it." "Waiting for what?" he asked quietly. "For someone to see me beyond what I do, beyond the red carpets, beyond the smile. For someone to just say, 'Thank you for being kind.'" He smiled faintly. "You've always been kind." "Not always," she whispered. "But I tried." The room fell quiet again. Outside, the city hummed softly in the distance. The firelight flickered across their faces, warm and golden. Then she reached for his hand. He didn't expect it, but he didn't pull away either. Their fingers intertwined slowly, naturally, like something long overdue. "So what do we do now?" she asked. "We breathe," he said. "We don't plan. We don't rush. We just see where honesty takes us." She smiled faintly. "That's not very Hollywood of you." He laughed softly. "Maybe that's why it feels right." She leaned back slightly, still holding his hand. "The world will talk about this for weeks," she said. "They'll twist it, turn it, sell it. But when the noise dies down, I'll remember one thing." "What's that?" "That you didn't hide anymore," she said quietly. "And maybe I shouldn't either." For the first time in a long while, he felt something like peace settle inside him. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't certain, but it was real. He stood, looked down at her, and said softly, "Thank you for reading it." "Thank you for writing it," she replied. He started to walk toward the door, but she stopped him. "Keanu?" He turned. She held up the letter. "This doesn't belong in the past anymore." He looked at her, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe it's time we stop being ghosts in each other's stories." He hesitated, then smiled. "You think we could do that?" "Maybe," she said. "If we start tomorrow." He nodded slowly, his eyes warm. "Tomorrow, then." He stepped outside into the cool night. The wind brushed against his face, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. He felt seen. Inside, Sandra sat quietly, holding the letter against her heart. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, only that it would be different, because sometimes life doesn't give second chances. But when it does, it usually begins with a letter that was never meant to be read. The peace they waited for the next morning came quietly. A soft golden light poured through the clouds above Los Angeles, as if the world itself wanted to begin again. Keanu woke early, his mind still half between dream and memory. The events of the past days played through his thoughts like scenes from a movie he couldn't stop watching. He sat by the window, a cup of black coffee in his hands, and watched the city below waking up. News vans still waited outside his gate, and his phone was still full of unanswered calls. But for once, he didn't feel trapped by it. He felt calm, like he had already faced the storm and found stillness on the other side. A quiet knock came at his door. When he opened it, Sandra stood there. No makeup, no cameras, no pretense, just her, real, calm, with the faintest smile that spoke more than words. "You walked past reporters?" he asked softly. "Yeah," she said, stepping inside. They shouted 100 questions. "I didn't answer any." "Good," he said with a gentle laugh. Silence confuses them. She smiled faintly and looked around. His home was quiet, filled with books, paintings, and soft light. Everything about it felt like him, simple, thoughtful, peaceful. "I couldn't sleep," she said, sitting down on the couch. "Too many thoughts. Too many people talking for us." He nodded slowly. "I know the feeling." For a while, they sat in silence, the kind that didn't feel empty. She watched the light move across the floor. He watched her breathing slow, her shoulders soften. It felt like they had both been holding their breath for years and were finally exhaling together. "They want us to make a statement," she said quietly. "The networks, the magazines, everyone. They want us to explain." "What is there to explain?" he asked. She looked at him. "That it's not a movie. That this is real." He nodded. "Then maybe we should tell them that." She tilted her head slightly. "Together?" Together," he said. 2 days later, they sat side by side in a small studio. No audience, no stage lights, no glamour. Just 2 chairs, 1 camera, and a journalist they both trusted. The air in the room felt sacred somehow, like they were about to close a long chapter that had been left open for too many years. The interviewer started gently. "Keanu, Sandra, thank you for doing this. The world has been talking about you for days. How are you both feeling?" Keanu glanced at Sandra, then said quietly, "We're okay." "It's been strange but peaceful in its own way." Sandra smiled softly. "Sometimes the truth has to make noise before it finds calm." The interviewer nodded. "The clip that went viral, and it felt very personal." "Keanu, you said there was someone you still think about when the world goes quiet, and now everyone believes it's Sandra. Is that true?" Keanu took a slow breath, then looked at Sandra before answering. "It's true. I said those words years ago, and I meant them then. I still mean them now." A soft pause filled the room. The interviewer turned to Sandra. "How did you feel when you heard it?" She smiled gently, her eyes glistening. "I felt seen. Not as an actress, not as a headline, but as a person. And that's rare." Keanu nodded. "We've both lived our lives in front of the world. But what people don't see are the quiet moments, the ones that shape who you really are. Those are the ones that connect us." "So what happens now?" the interviewer asked softly. Sandra looked at him and smiled faintly. "Maybe nothing big. Maybe we just live. Maybe that's the point, to live honestly." Keanu nodded slowly, his expression peaceful. "Sometimes peace isn't loud. Sometimes it's just two people finally understanding each other." The interviewer smiled. "That's beautiful. It's real," Keanu said simply. When the interview aired, the world reacted in silence first. Not gossip, not speculation, but admiration. People shared clips not because it was scandalous, but because it felt human. Two people who had seen fame, loss, and time finally spoke truth without fear. Comments filled the internet again, but this time they were different. "This is what love looks like. Quiet, mature, kind." They didn't confess for attention. They confessed for peace. The world needed to hear this kind of honesty. And slowly the noise began to fade. Weeks passed. The headlines moved on, but their connection didn't. One afternoon, Keanu and Sandra met again at the same cafe where everything had started. This time, there were no cameras, no secrets, no weight of expectation. The world had finally let them breathe. They sat by the window again, sunlight spilling across the table. "Feels different now," she said softly. "It does," he said. "It feels right." "Do you ever think about how strange it is?" she asked. "One interview, one sentence, and suddenly the world knew what we never said." He smiled. "Maybe the world was waiting for us to say it." She laughed softly. "Well, they got their story." "And we got ours," he said quietly. She looked at him for a long moment, the corners of her eyes soft with warmth. "So what now?" "Now," he said, "we just live." They talked for hours, about movies, memories, dogs, life, and peace. No drama, no tension, just two people who had carried too much finally learning to rest. As the sun began to set, she reached across the table, her hand finding his. He looked at her and smiled. The same quiet smile that had started everything all those years ago. "You know," she said softly, "that letter you wrote, it might have been the most honest thing I've ever read." He nodded slowly. "And you reading it might have been the most healing thing that's ever happened to me." They sat there in silence, watching the light fade into gold and then into dusk. Outside, people walked past without noticing them. And for once, that was exactly how they wanted it. Because some stories don't need to end with noise. Some end with peace. The kind that comes when two hearts finally meet where they were always meant to. As the sky turned dark and the city lights began to shimmer, Keanu whispered softly, almost to himself. "After all these years, I finally came home?" Sandra smiled, her voice barely a whisper. "And I was waiting." And in that small, quiet cafe, with the world finally at peace around them, they both knew the story wasn't ending. It was only just beginning, this time in truth, in calm, in kindness, and in love that no longer needed to hide.